There are a lot of constants within Elden Ring, so many things that overlap, but I think the biggest one has to be trees. Trees are everywhere inside of Elden Ring, and they hold a massive importance. I mean, damn, the first thing we see when we enter Limgrave is the Erdtree. It towers over us for most of the game, and when it's not towering over us and we're in the underground, we see these chalky tree trunks, not to mention the long-forgotten roots of great trees located in the deep-root depths. And when we're in the Lands of Shadow, we have the scadutree. There are trees everywhere, and their light and their touch and their sight is seen everywhere inside of this amazing game. There is a lot more to them, and I want to talk about everything to do with them in today's video. Before we go any further, if at the end of the video you have enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel and it lets me know you're enjoying this style of content. Without any further dilly-daddling, please sit back, relax, grab some succulent, juicy, tender and sensational prawns if you want, and enjoy. For the longest time, I believed that the Erdtree was some sort of parasitic being, that it sprung upon the roots of the great tree that we see in the deep-root depths, and formed this golden illusion we see looming over the lands between. But I've come to a different thought, and I think this makes a lot more sense. If you look anywhere inside the lands between, hell, inside of Elden Ring, there is always a great tree. Now, the term great tree is what we're going to use for these kind of trees. The great trees are intrinsically linked to the outer gods. We see this in two very big examples. The first of which being inside the Elden Beast boss fight, where we can see rows and rows, a whole forest of Erdtrees in the background. And the second of which being in Night Rain. And before you scream, Gecko, Night Rain isn't canon, well, before the shattering, that bit is canon. After the shattering is when the timeline diverges. In Night Rain, we see this divine tower that has this great tree curling around it, which progresses in size as the days go on. And the final day, when we enter this new realm through its goop, we see this crazy tree in the background. It looks like a great tree on steroids, and I definitely believe it is. This led me down a train of thought of, what if these great trees, obviously we know they are very intrinsic to the actual order of gods and outer gods, but what if there was more connection to the outer gods than we originally thought? I've always found it really interesting that we're never given an exact time period for what comes after the splitting off from the one great. And I think this was intentional to lead us to build our own conclusions, and I've certainly got one for you today. I believe these great trees are primordial beings. At the roots of the Erdtree, we can see what looks like the original Crucible Great Tree. Now, it has been taken over and corrupted by the Golden Order, aka the Greater Will. This corruption shows that someone's will can be enacted upon these great trees, and it can be manipulated to your own desire. When I say you, I really mean an outer god, but you know, hey ho. This theme of wills being used to subjugate the great trees is further seen in the Shadow of the Erdtree. In the Shadow of the Erdtree, the scadutree is actually made up of two trees. The original is in fact being strangled by the new one, and from the original, the sap we see from the scadutree falls. If we go off the topic that these great trees can take on these wills of the outer gods, then this makes so much sense. For inside the Lands of Shadow, there are two factions which fit this really well. That being Marika's, aka Mesmer's people, and the Haunsant. The Haunsant are what I think are the original. The Haunsant came first before Marika's people, or at least before they sort of established themselves. And as the ages have gone on, their culture and their people are slowly being strangled away at. And who are they being strangled by? Who is their life force being drained from them? Well, Marika and her people, and more specifically, Mesmer, whose crusade burnt through the Haunsant and has led them to this disastrous state of extinction they are in now. It does leave me with a question: is it a conscious decision to take on the will and inflict the will, your own will, upon these great trees, or is it something subconscious to the area? Did the form of the scadutree come about due to the nature of the war? Did the presence of the Greater Will and the Golden Order coming to rise form the Erdtree as we know it? It's a question that really is up to your own interpretation. I think it's a really good 50-50, and I'm really curious to see what you all have to say. Yet either way you look at it, wills are being enacted upon these great trees. And they are very important. Now why do I think this? Well, all the gods, no matter what pantheon they're from, every single great tree is used in some capacity as some sort of conduit for some kind of outer god. Inside the Erdtree, we have the Elden Beast, who is a vassal of the Greater Will, and is a pure example of the cosmos. Within the Great Tree, inside of Night Rain, we find the Goop, which transports us to what I believe is probably the realm of the outer gods, considering how cosmic it looks, not to mention the massive Great Tree in the background. And with the case of the Shadow of the Erdtree and the scadutree, I think at one point in time it probably was used in some capacity like the other great trees, but considering the other tree that is sprouting up from its semi-corpse, I think whatever area was probably there has been long since destroyed. As I mentioned just, they are very important to the outer gods, which means they have something the outer gods don't. And I think the most likely example of what this is these great trees are primordial in form. I believe these great trees are in of themselves deities that have been here long before the lands between. This would also make sense when you take into consideration the inspiration the great trees have from the Yggdrasil, something known as the World Tree inside of Norse mythology. The World Tree is the centre of everything in Norse mythology. It holds the 9 realms and its roots reach into every point of the 9 realms. From Software is no stranger from taking inspiration to Norse mythology. The best example and the most recent one being over the last year and a half, I've translated and transcribed bits and pieces throughout all of Elden Ring that have actually been comprised of Futhark, which was the most common language at the time of Norse mythology at its peak. A lot of the runes that are used and inscribed all around Elden Ring and actually have translations are in fact a lot of the runes which are used in Norse mythology. For example, Odin hung himself upon the World Tree and he gained the power of runes. Runes, well, we also see runes all throughout Elden Ring, not to mention the idea of him hanging from the World Tree, aka possibly the Erdtree, to then gain the power of runes, sounds very similar to how we find Marika inside of the Erdtree. But getting back on topic, there is a lot of inspiration from Norse mythology as we can see, and the fact that these runes are present further proves this. Another thing this also proves is the idea that these trees are somehow primeval, that they are older than perhaps even the outer gods themselves. Perhaps they were one of the first creations that came about after splitting from the One Great. For if their inspiration is from the World Tree, well, the World Tree is one of the first things that came about. I think this makes a lot of sense. There's one part of the Great Trees we haven't talked about yet, and I've been saving it for this little part, for a little surprise in case you stuck around for this long. Godwyn. Godwyn's presence at the base of the Erdtree and its roots leads to those very roots being corrupted. The very tree itself, the bark, turns death-like and has death-like fuzzy protrusions sprouting alongside it. It becomes the very epitome of Godwyn, and I believe this is another example of wills being enacted upon the great trees. Annoyingly, this doesn't give us a definitive answer to what we were talking about earlier in regards to whether it's a conscious decision to enact these wills. For Godwyn is, for all intensive purposes, brain dead. His soul has been destroyed, so surely that would imply that he doesn't have any conscious decision and therefore it's a subconscious thing. But at the same time, he's not completely mindless. He's got instincts. If I'm right about this, this means that his goal is to spread whatever is inside him, to push this parasitic death root all throughout any place that he can. And so, if his will is that, then he has consciously enacted that will, spreading the death root through the roots of the great trees. Meaning that it also could be seen as a conscious decision. It's a really 50-50 chance, once again, of it being either possibility. Honestly, I was kind of hoping Godwyn might shed some light on a definitive answer, but it really seems like it's one or the other, and total personal preference on which one you think is more likely. I briefly mentioned it earlier, but the great tree instead of night rain that curls around the divine tower does in fact have fingers, 10 to be precise. Now fingers are a big role inside of Elden Ring, and they're very much associated with the one great. I've always seen it as 3 fingers, 2 fingers, put them together and you get what the world's properly meant to be. The whole idea of the 3 fingers is for everything to become one with the one great again. Considering the tree sprouted these 10 fingers, I think it's further proof that the great trees are directly linked to the one great and the outer gods. I've always thought, right, that the divine towers look really similar to the giant tree-like chalk things that we see in the underground of Elden Ring. Now, if we then look at the great tree and the divine tower inside of Night Rain, well, it seems like the influence and the will of these white trees has been transferred onto the great tree. For the great tree is now white, which is the same sort of colour we see on these chalk-looking trees that sprout up in the underground. I don't know, maybe I'm reaching. I'm really curious to see what you all have to say, because I think the shape, the size, it's eerily similar to what we see in the underground when we're looking at the divine towers. Sadly everyone, that is the end of the video. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel and lets me know you're enjoying this style of content. I don't normally say this, but the channel does have a Discord link. It's in the pinned comment and the top of the description. Hope to see you all there. I quite literally ramble at the end of every video, and I'm starting to think maybe I should probably stop that. So, please friends, don't you dare go hollow, and may you find your worth in the waking world. See you in the next one, and goodbye.